Haunted Motel Room, Diary, By Midnight Whispers, Archive. Please like and subscribe to support us. Let's begin. Hi everyone, my name is H. I can't reveal my full name for personal reasons, so please forgive the anonymity. I'm 23, and the story I'm about to share might sound like a ghost tale, something eerie, mysterious, and horrifying. But honestly, even I'm not entirely sure what it is. I'm writing this as a personal diary of sorts, documenting the terrifying days I've just endured, and maybe am still enduring. I think some of you might find it intriguing. After all, who doesn't love a bizarre supernatural story ripped straight from real life and narrated by the person who lived it? Whether you believe it or not is up to you. It's been almost a week since I moved into that boarding room, and my mind is, let's just say, a mess. Call it a nervous breakdown if you want. But honestly, this chaos feels almost normal compared to what I've survived and what's still coming. I'll start by recounting the past few days and update you as things unfold. Brace yourselves for a story I guarantee you won't forget. 2 weeks ago, my old landlady decided to demolish her row of boarding rooms to build a cafe and pool hall. With nowhere else to go, I crashed at my aunt's drink stall while hunting for a new job. I used to work at a factory in Bien Hoa, Industrial Zone 2. The company's name stays secret. After asking around, a friend hooked me up with a room rented by a distant relative. The price? A steal for a factory worker like me. $700K a month, complete with a loft, private bathroom, and a location near the main road. I jumped at the offer. The room was tucked into a narrow alley, steps away from a grocery store and a small noodle shop that bustled from dawn till dusk. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. I paid a $700K deposit without a second thought. That same afternoon, I hired a mover to haul my stuff from the old place. Little did I know, that moment marked the beginning of the most horrifying chapter of my life. One I'll never escape, no matter how hard I try. My belongings were sparse. A TV, a bulky desktop computer, a mattress, and some pots and pans. But in that cramped, dimly lit room, even the ordinary felt sinister. The boarding house had 4 rooms in total. The first room belonged to the landlady, who sold fruits, while the other 3 were for rent. My room was at the end of the row, a 4.5-meter space bordering a wild, overgrown vacant lot. The first 3 rooms shared a corrugated iron roof, but mine stood apart, separated by a narrow 3-meter pathway leading to a locked, abandoned bathroom. I later learned that this outdoor bathroom was still functional, despite the landlady claiming it had been closed for renovation. But more on that horror later. From the outside, my room looked newer. The walls were painted a pale lime green, and the floor was tiled. Inside, it was almost empty except for a wooden wardrobe on the loft. The landlady let me keep it for my clothes. The loft itself was made of creaky wooden planks. Beneath it, on the left side, was the bathroom. A staircase hugged the bathroom wall, leading up to the loft, and next to it was a window facing that cursed vacant lot. What a ridiculous design. I eventually boarded that window up permanently. You'll understand why soon. Another window by the entrance offered a clear view of the grocery store across the alley. After moving in, I tried introducing myself to the neighbors, but their doors were shut tight. Maybe they were at work. The landlady's place had Wi-Fi and cable TV, so I thought I'd ask to share the connection, but that could wait until tomorrow. After that, I locked the door and sprawled on the floor to rest. It was around 11:05 a.m. I remember checking my phone after a spam call woke me. I drifted off, only to be jolted awake by the shrill crowing of a rooster. The sound was faint but piercing, relentless for a solid 10 minutes. At one point, it felt like the rooster was right outside my door. I glanced out the window twice but saw nothing. Then, abruptly, silence swallowed everything. I tried to sleep again but fell into a feverish haze. My head spun, and my limbs turned leaden. I wanted to grab some menthol oil, but my eyes refused to open, my body paralyzed. Moments later, someone shook me awake. The landlady. She said I'd been thrashing and screaming so loudly she heard it from her room. She found me stiff as a corpse, drenched in cold sweat. I thanked her, performed a ritual to ward off bad energy, then unrolled my mattress, skipping dinner. I told myself it was just exhaustion and collapsed into sleep until midnight, when a strange noise in the bathroom yanked me back to hell. Woke to ragged breathing echoing from the bathroom beside my bed. At first, slow and deliberate, then faster, sharper. Then came the sobs, guttural, choked whimpers, like something was clawing at its own throat. The cries crescendoed until I couldn't take it anymore. Drenched in sweat, I forced myself to stagger to the light switch. My legs trembled. The room spun. I flung the bathroom door open. Nothing. Just tiles, a sink, and silence. The cycle repeated 3 times that night. Each time, the sounds grew more deranged. Each time, the bathroom stood empty. By dawn, I was a hollow shell, my mind frayed beyond repair. I tried convincing myself that last night's horrors were just hallucinations. Or at least, that's what I told myself to stay sane. Exhausted, I dragged myself to the noodle shop across the alley for breakfast. When I mentioned being the new tenant in that room, the owner froze. Her face twitched, a flicker of fear, quickly masked by a forced smile. She changed the subject, but her eyes kept darting toward the boarding house. All day, my mind buzzed with questions about the room. That evening, I confronted the landlady about the Wi-Fi and cable TV. Casually, I brought up the nightmare she'd supposedly rescued me from. Her reply turned my blood to ice. I never came to your room yesterday, and I certainly didn't hear any screams. My face paled. I remembered locking the door before collapsing on the floor. The landlady shrugged, blaming it on exhaustion and bad winds, but her indifference felt rehearsed, like she'd said those words 1,000 times before. As I walked back to my room, the narrow pathway to the abandoned bathroom loomed ahead. A cold gust screeched through the alley, a sound like nails on de glace. Then I saw it, a towering figure draped in a tattered white shroud, hunched and lurching toward the bathroom door. It stood over 7 feet tall, its limbs grotesquely elongated, but the worst part was how it moved. Not on 2 legs, but 4, dragging 2 wooden prosthetics attached to its front limbs. Each step echoed with a hollow clack-clack as the artificial legs scraped the ground. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pile of buckets. When I looked up, the bathroom door was shut. No figure, no sound, just the wind howling through the cracks. I gulped down a glass of water, trying to steady myself. Regret over renting this room gnawed at me. Later, I met a few friends at a cafe, avoiding any mention of returning to that cursed place. When I finally confessed to my best friend, he laughed it off, accusing me of making up ghost stories. By 6 p.m., everyone left, and I lingered alone until 7:30, dreading the walk back. As I passed room 3, I noticed a sliver of light under the door. Someone was home, but before I could knock, the light flicked off. Defeated, I hurried past the pathway to the abandoned bathroom, a cold dread slithering down my spine. After showering, I climbed the creaky loft to unpack. The wooden wardrobe, once fitted with glass, now removed, stood dusty but functional. As I folded clothes, my gaze drifted to the window facing the vacant lot. A shadow shifted in the bushes. Then it crawled closer, clawing up the window frame until its face pressed against the glass. Pale, cracked skin, hollow black eyes, and a jaw stretched impossibly wide, dripping with dark sludge. I stumbled back, crashing to the floor. When I looked again, it was gone. Strangely, fear didn't consume me. I'd seen that face before. Summer of 7th grade, in my rural hometown. The village kids dragged me night fishing. We cast nets, then huddled around a campfire roasting potatoes. My cousin T dared me to check the nets. I grabbed a lantern, playing the brave older cousin, and peered into the murky water. Something stirred beneath the surface. A face emerged, bloated, white as chalk, with fissured skin and a mouth ripped open to its ears. Its hollow eyes burned with hatred. Then it spoke in a shrill, watery screech that still haunts my dreams. "Cold, come down, join me," I screamed, hurled the lantern into the river, and collapsed, trembling. For weeks, that face invaded my sleep. Even after returning to the city, its voice echoed in the dark. Eventually, the nightmares faded, or so I thought. I must have passed out after the window encounter. That night, the fishing nightmare returned, vivid, suffocating. The face from my childhood merged with the thing in the room, its voice now a chorus. "Cold, come down." When dawn broke, I was drenched in sweat, my sheets tangled like a shroud. Day 3, Wednesday, June 4th. Neighbor in room 2. Things not to be shared. I cannot post what happened on day 3 due to the lack of permission from the neighbor in room 2, K. Yesterday, after posting about day 2, I went home to grab some stuff. As I was approaching the door, a tall, thin young man tapped my shoulder and introduced himself as the neighbor from room 2. He asked me to come over to his room to talk. When I entered his room, my first thought was that K was a devout Christian, because there were crosses and statues of Christ everywhere. I didn't feel particularly comfortable in the room because I follow Buddhism, not because I had any prejudice. My best friend is also Christian, but it just wasn't very comfortable for me. Kay and I had a short conversation. He told me that he knew everything going on in that room. He had lived there for over 4 years and had also been indirectly affected by whatever haunted the room. Or, more precisely, the entire hallway. I felt a bit calmer after hearing that from him, because I believed I wasn't just being paranoid and there might be someone who could help me. Afterward, Kay seemed quite upset about what I had posted online and said the idea was foolish. He told me that I didn't understand the situation at all. The things that happened there were not just ghostly scares. It was beyond that. And it wasn't like the boring horror movies. This was life-threatening. People had died. And the more people involved, the more trouble it would cause. It sounded a bit ridiculous, and I initially thought I wouldn't take his words seriously. But I continued the conversation because I thought Kay might help me with this issue. After I told him more about what I intended to post next, and tried to persuade him to allow me to continue, he agreed to let me post what he felt comfortable with. He also advised me to avoid staying in the last room in the hallway, as it was the most haunted. I thought that Kay wasn't just thinking about the readers on the forum, but maybe he had another reason. Perhaps he was hoping that a more experienced forum member would read my post and offer help. He suggested I move into his room because it had been blessed, and that would minimize any effects from whatever was haunting the place. As per what Kay allowed, day 3 is the part I'm not allowed to share. After our conversation, I went back to help at my aunt's shop. Today, my aunt's family went out, so the cafe was closed, which gave me time to post and answer questions from all of you. To make up for the story I was supposed to share today, I'll tell you a different story. One that's true, as storytellers often say to make their stories more believable. A story my grandmother and uncles told me during my visits to my maternal hometown in Enjol. The Hungry Ghost. My grandmother had 6 children, and my mother was the 5th. Above her was my Uncle N, who owns the cafe I help at. Then my Uncle M. Uncle M is around 60 now and used to be a soldier for a while. I think about 4 years. So he became tough and fearless, especially when it came to ghost stories. He didn't believe in them, but he was very interested. Back when he was in the army, he used to go with his friends to the cemetery to try to summon ghosts or whatever. My grandmother's house has a large plot of land, and there's a cemetery nearby. During the war, many people died from starvation or were killed, and they were all buried in that cemetery. After the war, my Uncle M came back, married, and my grandmother gave him a plot of land right next to the cemetery. Even though he had a wife, my Uncle M couldn't stop his reckless ways. He still liked to tease ghosts, blaspheme, and provoke spirits like he did before. And as expected, something eventually happened. One time, my uncle and his wife had an argument, and she took their child and went to stay at her parents' house for a few days. That night, my uncle bought some snacks and alcohol to drink alone. While he was eating, he started tapping his bowl, knowing full well that it would attract spirits. Suddenly, he heard a noise in the kitchen. When he went to check, he saw that all the dishes had been overturned. He thought it was just a child or a cat or something, so he stood there yelling. My mother and aunt, who were at my grandmother's house, ran over to check and were horrified to see a black shadow bent over outside the door, picking up the fallen items and eating them. My uncle kept yelling as if he was unaware of the presence of the entity. My mother and aunt screamed, and the shadow lunged toward my uncle's mouth, and he started convulsing. He screamed, and my grandmother and the others ran over. Everyone was terrified when they saw my uncle, who was now acting crazed, mouth wide open, groaning as he ate the fallen items and even started biting his own hands and legs. Blood poured out of him. My grandmother, terrified, ran into the garden to pull a mulberry tree branch while the others chanted prayers. My grandmother returned and began striking my uncle with the branch. After a while, my uncle cried out, vomited something black, which squirmed and then shot out toward the cemetery, disappearing into the night. My uncle fainted and was taken to the clinic, where he stayed for a week. Later, my grandmother invited a priest to perform rituals, and my uncle finally recovered and was brought back home. Day 4, Thursday, June 5th. Nightmares. Becoming reality. Part 1. Today, I seem to focus more on my work at the cafe. Uncle N told me that tomorrow he and some of his siblings would go on a trip, so he asked me to work in the morning and then stay overnight to watch the cafe. Tomorrow night, I wouldn't have to sleep in that terrible place. I secretly felt relieved. Yesterday, while I was working, I mentioned the new room I had rented, but Uncle dismissed it and said I was probably just joking. I hoped it was just an illusion or a misunderstanding, but it was becoming more and more real. It got to the point where I had to close the window that faced the wasteland and put up a World Cup schedule on the window, so I wouldn't have to see what was out there anymore. That afternoon, I felt too tired, so I left early. The cafe was quiet, and Uncle was preparing for the trip tomorrow, so I didn't really care where they were going. When I got back, I stopped by the landlord's room to talk about some rent issues, and then I ended up chatting. I asked about the tenants of rooms 2 and 3. The landlord said that room 2 was rented by a guy named Kay, around 35 years old, who worked as an architect or something. He used to go to work, but now it seems like he works online from his room. One time, the landlord entered his room and found it messy like a trash heap. Kay just shrugged and didn't really care. But after that, the room was cleaner when the landlord checked. As for room 3, it was rented by a girl named M and her sister, also named M. They had been living there for a while, even before Kay. The two sisters were twins, but the older one was very quiet. So quiet that the landlord had never heard her speak. The younger one was chatty, and both of them worked the third shift. In the past, the landlord would sometimes see the older sister, but now she never came around. The younger sister rarely went out anymore, and when asked, she said her sister had moved out. The landlord never saw her move, so it was assumed she left during the night. I had been planning to meet them one day. Maybe they understood the place and could offer some advice. Since the landlord was taking a nap, I decided to leave. Just as I was about to stand up and slip on my sandals, I suddenly felt a chill, and I had a bad feeling in my gut. I turned back toward the room, and my whole body froze. A figure wearing a white dress with long hair trailing on the floor came out from the old bathroom doorway. I wasn't sure if it came from the old bathroom doorway or from the wall. Saying it came from the wall sounds kind of silly, so I'll assume it came from the old bathroom doorway. The way it moved was strange, like it was gliding above the ground. Its hair dragged along the floor and around its feet. It turned to face me, revealing a gaunt face half hidden by its hair. My soul seemed to leave my body. The door to the landlord's room was behind me, and I could have turned and called out at any moment, but I couldn't. More accurately, I didn't dare to take my eyes off it. The figure lifted its head, revealing the face of a man, over 60 years old, with wrinkled skin. Yes, a man wearing a dress. Sounds strange, but that's exactly what it was. His left eye was hidden by his hair, and only one eye was visible. The dress was very old and stained, with strange patterns I couldn't focus on because his eye seemed to have some kind of power that kept me from looking anywhere else. His eye was white, with a small black dot in the center, empty and lifeless, but it exuded an overwhelming, terrifying feeling as I looked into it. Tears started to flow from my eyes. For a moment, I rubbed my eyes, and when I looked back, the figure was much closer, about 5 meters away. The fear was overwhelming. My limbs went from stiff to completely weak, and I trembled uncontrollably. This was insane. Why was this strange entity standing in the hallway in broad daylight? And no one else could see it. But me? There were people at the noodle shop and across the street at the general store, yet no one seemed to notice it. My mind and emotions were completely scrambled. I couldn't bring myself to look around, fearing it would get closer. Then, I heard someone calling from the general store, and I made the mistake of looking away from the figure. In an instant, it was right in front of me, about a meter away. Its face will forever be etched into my mind. A deep, unexplainable hatred radiated from the lifeless eyes. Its mouth opened, and something black, earthy, and brown started to ooze out. At first, it smelled faintly like perfume, but the stench quickly grew so foul that I couldn't breathe. There was a streak of blood across its chest, soaking into the hair in front. It moaned, and the foul liquid mixed with the blood, creating a smell that was both rotten and metallic. I felt my head spinning, and my limbs lost control. I stumbled backward and crashed into the landlord's door before collapsing and passing out. When I woke up, I was sitting in my room, and next to me was a bottle of menthol oil. The landlord entered, handed me some water, and said I must have caught a cold and fainted in front of the room. But I swore to the landlord that what I had seen was real. There was no way it was a hallucination. Why could no one else see it but me? The landlord didn't say anything, just told me to rest. 2. Be continued. Day 4, Thursday, June 5th. Nightmares. Becoming reality. Part 2. I had been lying down for a while when I was awakened by a strange dream. Looking outside, it was already late afternoon. I tried hard and, without much difficulty, recalled the dream. I dreamt that I was lying on the floor, and suddenly, something that looked like a cow appeared, but it had a long horn and wore a mask like that of an indigenous person, with black bird feathers around the edge of the mask, like a lion's mane. It moved on 3 legs. Actually, it had 5 legs, 3 for walking and 2 like arms, with the 3rd leg growing out from its right thigh. It wore an armor-like cloak and carried a chain, dragging it along the floor while standing on 2 legs. It walked to the door, and the door opened by itself. I woke up and started talking as if the landlord was there, the same as the first day. Then, that thing stepped into the room and vanished. The scene changed, and I found myself lying under a blanket. A large rat, walking on 2 legs, with 6 or 7 eyes on its face, began crawling toward me. Then, a flash of white light appeared, and it screamed before rushing through the wall toward the wasteland. This didn't actually happen. The scene changed once more, and I saw myself with another man inside an abandoned shrine. Looking back now, it seemed like Kay, but thinner. We appeared very scared. And then a statue of a headless general on the altar suddenly shuddered, drew its sword, and jumped off the pedestal to chase after us. Kay blocked one of the strikes for me and collapsed, dead. Something happened afterward, but I don't remember. The statue was destroyed. I was really worried about this, as it seemed like the first scene was a warning about everything. The scene changed again. and I saw myself in a room, my body covered in blood. A girl entered, and a blinding light flashed. She helped me out of that place. Another terrible scene. The dream left me feeling uneasy. Maybe these things would actually happen. I lay back down and tried to sleep. Then I woke up suddenly, hearing a voice echo in the room. I'm here. Heh, heh, huh. Something darted past me, and I heard footsteps upstairs, as if it had gone up there. I was covered in sweat, lying under the blanket. After a while, I heard voices upstairs, like someone was having a conversation with someone else, but no one was answering. Only one voice continued the conversation, as if it was hearing a response. The conversation was brief, and although I couldn't remember the exact words, I could still recall the content and the uncomfortable sniffling sound of that thing. What do you think about that guy? Sniff, sniff. I know. He's not worth worrying about. Only the other one is dangerous. Not yet. Sniff, sniff, not yet. I'm not sure. He's holding the other half of it. Right. The consequences later. We must sniff. We must use him. But it's very hard to reach him. Almost impossible. Sniff. Right. There's a rat listening in. Sniff, sniff. At this point, I realized that the thing was coming toward me. I don't know why it didn't notice me at first, but I could sense that danger was near. I tried to jump out of bed and run, but my body was paralyzed, and I fainted. When I woke up, nothing was there, and I slept straight through until morning. End of part 1. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Goodbye, and hope you all have a good night's sleep. Thank you.